Leslie Zane, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for coming on. You are the author of a book, The Power of Instinct, The New Rules of Persuasion in Business and Life. In fact, you've actually spent most of your career championing a new way to do marketing that's faster, easier, and more effective. You're also known as a pioneer in instinct marketing and the founder of Triggers, an agency which you started 25 years ago on this very premise. I'd love to dive into that a bit more, but for listeners today, Triggers is perhaps the go-to for a lot of Fortune 100 companies trying to change resistant perceptions and drive conversion to their brands. In fact, you are the secret weapon or secret sauce, as some might put it, to some of the more famous success stories, such as that of McDonald's, Aquafina, and Snickers, to name a few, with incremental revenue growth for clients exceeding $50 billion and counting. I'm curious, Leslie, when you talk about the power of instinct, I'm sure in my mind as well as that of listeners, there is a bit of a question mark as to what exactly do you mean? Is this, are you hearkening to more the emotional side of thinking, or is there something entirely different?
First of all, Vinay, thank you so much for having me. It's lovely to be here. Always happy to come on and talk about my favorite subject.
So,
So, when I talk about instinct, what I mean is that moment of decision making when your instinctive mind just takes
mhm,
over. It's really quite primal. If you were, let's say, in the supermarket and you were deciding between Pepsi and Coke, you have your go to brand and you just reach. And you do that in pretty much every category that you
mhm,
shop in. And while I'm giving that supermarket example because it's particularly easy to grasp onto, this is true of everything that you, in every aspect of your life, every decision that you make. So it could be choosing which doctor, which insurance plan, which bank to use, which financial advisor, and certainly what new tech thing you're going to go buy. It's all the same. Everything is pretty much a
mhm.
brand. And as it turns out, we can influence the instinctive moment of choice. And knowing about how that works is incredibly freeing because, to your point, it enables you to grow business and grow your brand faster, more easily, with less money, like all of these.
So, would it be fair to say that the instinctive mind that you talk about is really born out of emotional connections that have been created perhaps over time?
So I like to stay away from the
Mhm,
word emotion for a very particular reason, because emotion is an outcome. It's how you want people to feel at the
mhm,
end of the day, but it's actually not what you use to drive choice at all. So if I make you laugh or I make you cry, the thinking is, oh, that's going to be it. That's going to be the thing that drives you to buy my brand. But in fact, the opposite is
mhm,
quite true. Emotion goes in one ear and out the other. So I found it not that useful to talk about emotion. There's really quite a misinterpretation of the facts. So let's just go back to for a moment to just establish how the human brain works, because I think that
mhm.
would be a good, rich
Sure.
foundation for everybody to have for this conversation. I'd like you to think of the mind as an iceberg, with the conscious mind above the waterline and the unconscious or instinctive mind below the waterline, the part you can't
Mhm,
see, right? That's the part that's below the waterline. As it turns out, that part of the mind exerts a vast majority of influence over our daily decisions. The part you can see is the part that we spend a lot of time trying to persuade. We try to barrage people with messages. We offer them coupons and discounts and all manner of different promotions to convince or persuade that conscious mind to do what we want it to do. And the conscious mind is very resistant to
mhm,
yielding to those efforts. So that's the first part, that the conscious mind is resistant to change. But even more than that, it's responsible for only about 5% of the decisions that people make anyway. So why are we spending all this time and effort on only 5% of the decisions people make when the vast majority of our decisions is made instinctively? That's where I'm trying to get people to redirect
mhm.
their efforts toward understanding how that instinctive mind works. And that way you can make change happen much faster. Think of the conscious mind as the path of greatest resistance to the sale.
Yep.
And the instinctive mind as the path of least resistance to a sale, because it is actually much more malleable. And if you hook your ideas to things that already exist in that instinctive mind, you can influence it much faster. You can grow your brand much faster so that it becomes the instinctive choice, because the command control center for our decisions is located in that instinctive mind. So it makes no sense to try to influence the conscious mind, because it's actually not calling the shots. The instinctive mind is. So that's just like a simple primer about how the brain works. Daniel Kahneman spent his entire life trying to explain how the instinctive mind makes the majority of decisions. Many of them are irrational, because we are these funny creatures that do operate on instinct, and some of those instincts might lead us in the right direction, and some of those instincts might lead us in the wrong direction, but it doesn't matter, because to your point, it's the cumulative memories about a brand that actually influences our choices. But the mistake that the entire marketing and advertising industry made is that when he said people make irrational decisions, the industry reacted by saying, oh, therefore I must communicate emotion to win. And they leapt to the wrong conclusion. The right conclusion is no, what we actually need to do is understand what lies beneath instinct in order to pull the right levers, almost like Google Analytics
Yep.
for the mind, for the brain. We need to understand the levers, the barriers, the drivers at an implicit level, and then we can influence choice more easily. So I'm here to correct a lot of misperceptions that are leading the marketing and advertising industry kind of to go in the wrong direction, and to change the way we approach marketing to focus on the instinctive mind, because that is the key driver of choice.
Thank you for that. And it can be quite valuable, I would think, especially given the rather hyper-competitive B2B landscape that a lot of companies face, where oftentimes there's multiple vendors, where technical requirements and price points are incredibly similar. And we really need to understand what truly drives the final decision. Just to give listeners a bit of context here with some research, I found that 65% of B2B buyers claim they make purely rational decisions, yet studies show implicit factors heavily influence final vendor selection. Traditional B2B marketing focuses on features and benefits, ignoring the fact that the unconscious mind processes information 275,000 times faster than conscious deliberation. And most B2B companies struggle with differentiation when competing vendors, because they reach technical parity, and also because negative associations that create implicit barriers to purchase slow growth without companies even realizing why. Leslie, I'm curious, was there a particular event that led you down this path of thinking and to the creation of Triggers as it is today?
So I worked in brand management for many years before I started my company. So up until 1995, when I started Triggers, I was inside brand management at great companies like Procter and Gamble and Johnson. And here I was at some of the best marketing companies of the world. And I saw that a lot of the businesses and brands weren't growing, or they were losing market share, or the category was growing faster than they were. And I said, wait a minute, this is crazy. Here I am at P&G. If they don't know how to make marketing the engine of growth, this means nobody knows. And I quickly learned that nobody knows. That really, to your point of what you said a minute ago, most businesses don't know what drives their brands. They don't know what drives purchase. And they're caught up with looking at attributes like, is this tasty? Is this healthy? Does this work fast? Does this work slow? When really the drivers of choice are much more nuanced and much more implicit than that. The barriers and drivers that exist in the implicit mind, in the instinctive mind, those hidden associations, really, positive and negative associations that live in the instinctive mind are what really drives choice. You talk about negative associations, and I talk about them extensively in my book. So, what happens is a brand is humming along, and their brand health metrics say that everything is fine. Their net promoter score metrics say everything is fine. We're doing great. In fact, maybe our net promoter score has even gone up since last year. But after a couple of years, suddenly the business
Mhm.
falls off a cliff. And the business leaders are like, wait, what happened? How could this be? Our brand health metrics are saying that everything's fine. What's happening is a virus of negative associations has gotten into their brand connectome, and we'll talk more about what that is in a moment. And they don't realize it because they're not monitoring it, because they are looking at conscious metrics from a poll or a survey or some study where they're tracking these attributes. And attributes are not the same as associations. Associations are more implicit, very often they're
Mhm.
latent. And so they just don't come to the surface. And if you're not monitoring the unconscious mind of your growth target, then you may be surprised when the business falls out of bed. If your growth target, the people you're trying to get, have negative associations that have been left unaddressed for a while, then those turn into barriers. And I don't care if you spend $50 million, $100 million on advertising, you're going to hit a brick
Mhm.
wall. And so you need to be monitoring the unconscious mind, the implicit barriers and drivers of your growth target. So you know the nature of the positive and negative associations of your brand or your category, because there are negative and positive category associations as well that may have infiltrated your brand. And now you can develop a strategy to take those barriers down, to hit the key drivers that people want. But again, they're far more
Mhm.
nuanced than people think, and they're critical. They're critical to driving choice and to growing your business
Yeah.
successfully.
Brilliant. You've talked about the instinctive mind. Have you been able to break it down into some sort of key components or a bit of a framework for people to understand?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. So the framework we use is called the
Mhm.
Brand Connectome. And we discovered this like many years back. There is a human connectome, which is all the network of wiring that makes us who we are, where one region of the brain speaks to the other. It's all the connections that make up the
Mhm.
human brain. The human connectome is being studied by universities and scientists around the world in order to address diseases like Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's. What we discovered at Triggers is that you can go into that larger human connectome and pull out the associations for your brand and for the competition. So, what is the brand connectome? A model of it is just
Mhm.
right behind me, behind my right shoulder over here. It's a central node. Let's say your brand is Pepsi, and in connected to that central node is a network of
Mhm.
branches that hold positive associations, hopefully, and maybe some negative associations. But you want to keep it as positive as possible. So the definition of the brand connectome is the cumulative memories, which are made up of positive and negative associations, visual, verbal, etc., that live on these branches connected to your brand. So it's the cumulative memories, some going as far back as childhood, can, that are like glued to your brand in people's minds and the competition. And so you can explore, what does my brand look like in people's minds, in the people that I have and the people I don't have, growth target and core. And it could do the same thing for your competition, in which case you'll know more about your competition than your competition would even know about, which is fascinating. So there are three things that make a healthy brand connectome. One, you want it to be large. You want it to be salient in the mind. The more physical territory it takes up of your brain, the more connections it has, the more it's your instinctive go-to, right? Because it's more
Mhm.
salient in the mind. It just makes sense, right? Number two, you wanted to have a higher ratio of positive to negative associations, because negative associations hold back growth. So if I were upside down and I had 70% negative associations and only 30% positive associations, you can be sure that this brand would be steeply declining. Whereas if you had 70% positive and 30% negative, you're going to be humming along. You're going to have healthy, sustainable growth. And then the third thing you want is you want to have some distinctiveness. You don't want to be generic. But that actually, it turns out, is not as important as the other two. So large, salient, large, 2, positive, and 3, distinctive. Those are the 3 key things, key attributes that make for a healthy brand connectome.
Brilliant. Perhaps to help us wrap our minds around the concept, could we use an example, a web design firm? There's a lot of them out there. How would perhaps a new player in the market be able to decipher the brand connectome associated with website design? I'm assuming there are other factors as well that you would want to explore in order to be able to position themselves effectively in the marketplace and become the go-to provider of choice for their desired audience.
So one of the things you want to understand is who's the largest competitor. If you're a brand new company, so who is the largest web design company today? Who has the most market share? Who's the dominant player?
I wouldn't know. I'm assuming from what little I know that it would be entirely geographic. There would probably be a dominant firm in a particular place. Perhaps if we take Chicago, for example, where Orbit Media is probably the dominant player there.
Okay. But let's just say you would probably want to go after a national or even a global competitor. So let's say it's company Brand X web design firm, and it owns 50% market share of web design services. The first thing you would want to do is understand their brand connectome, right? Let's understand what are the positive and negative associations that they have. And if they have some negative associations, which I'm sure they do, because every brand has some negative associations, otherwise 100% of the world would be using them, because negative associations keep you away. Those negative associations become a really interesting thing to look at. If you can take your strength and put it against the negative association of a large dominant competitor, that becomes the Achilles heel that enables you to take some market share pretty fast. So that would be one of the first things that I would do. Other people talk about looking for white space. That's another way you can do it. I find that looking for negative associations of the large dominant competitor is almost an easier way to go, because you don't have to establish a whole new category. You can actually take share from an existing audience. You can start to move whole swaths of the population from that other competitor over to you. That's just an easier task. Sure, if you can launch a whole new thing with a whole new story and a whole new breakthrough, revolutionary expertise, you absolutely go do that. But those are hard to find. This enables you to compete in an existing category and take share pretty quickly from a much larger player, because you basically have a competitive advantage of yours against their weakness.
Let me see if I can reframe this a little bit differently, and please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. In exploring your largest competitors' negative associations and positioning yourself there, are we in effect refining our messaging in order to find traction with our audience by doing that?
100%. And obviously, you're not going to build your whole brand purely on that negative, that you're going to turn that negative into a positive. Obviously, that's what you're going to do. And I'm sure there's going to be lots of other aspects to your brand image and your tone of voice and your brand personality that are going to come into play. And all that's going to need to be wrapped together. But I'm just saying, as a competitive strategy, that tends to work really well. And it's really the story of disruptors that we've seen over the past 20 years, companies that are able to come along and take major share, Dollar Shave Club taking share from the Gillettes and Schics of the world, Carvana taking share from the brick and mortar automobile companies selling used cars. So there's a lot of many, too many to mention how many disruptors have come along and taken share from a larger company. But that's really what they're doing. They're finding a hole. They're finding a negative association from the larger dominant competitor, and they're putting a strength against their weakness. And that is one of the main ways to take share fast from an existing player.
I love that. I also am intrigued by your other point of trying to gauge or expand the mind share associated with your particular topic. In a lot of sales context, there's a lot of pressure put on people to get a sale for the month or for the quarter and hit those targets, which is very focused on perhaps I would say 5% of people who might be in the market for a possible solution, quite ignoring the other 95% or more folk who would probably be in the market at some point in time. And to me, it relates to the idea of having this mind share concept. How would you recommend companies, once they achieve their messaging, to build on that in order to gain traction with their potential audiences?
So first, I want to just say how much I love what you just said, because that's exactly what we find. We find that companies that are over relying on promotional techniques like coupons and discounts, they are able to move audiences, but it tends to be a very fleeting sale. So they'll get a bump, but it won't last very long. And the reason that it doesn't last long is, again, they've engaged the conscious mind in that transaction. But what they haven't done is what you were just talking about a minute ago. It's just they haven't gained mind share and they haven't created instinctive brand preference. So the thing about the first example of promoting, discounting, couponing, that's very expensive. It's expensive to get that kind of sale. But if you can create instinctive brand preference, then that becomes a flywheel that just keeps on going. And you don't have to keep promoting. In fact, it's a very profitable kind of sale to have. So let's talk about what mind share is really all about, because I love that you use that term. So if we think about a brand as a seed that I'm planting in other people's minds, then I need to grow that seed. And nobody really thinks about this, but I love thinking about it this way. A brand is a living thing. It's not your logo. It's not your website. It's not your brand name, your word mark. It's none of those things. A brand is an entity, a physical thing that lives in other people's minds. So if I plant a seed in other people's minds and I feed that seedling the nutrients it needs to grow, the equivalent of the soil, water, and sun is positive associations and assets, specific distinctive brand assets and distinctive brand triggers that live in the mind because they go into memory structure. And that becomes what you're laying down that makes it's basically the fertilizer for your plant to grow, to lay down a root system, to little by little grow from a seed into a seedling, into a plant, into hopefully a full grown tree. And that's how we need to think of ourselves as marketers. We're actually gardeners, and we need to keep feeding the plant so that it keeps thriving and keeps on growing. The moment that your brand stops growing, the moment that you stop feeding it positive associations, that's when negative associations set in and the brand starts to shrink and get smaller. And that creates the opportunity for another competitor to come along and grow its own tree and take market share from you. So it's a battle of the a battle of the living things in your mind, because brands grow and they shrink, and you have to constantly make sure that you're feeding your brand what it needs to thrive, and that is mind share.
Again, a really interesting point there. And again, correct me if I'm wrong here, but listening to what you're saying, I'm thinking the goal is resonance as opposed to what a lot of marketing teams are tasked with, which is to generate marketing qualified leads. or build out their email lists, etc.
Yeah.
Would that be correct?
Yes, because that resonance or
Hmm.
relevance is going to be the feeling that people have. But again, what we actually need to build are assets. So, what do I mean by assets? Assets are visual and verbal, they can be
Hmm.
auditory too, quite frank, but cues that are so sticky that they go into people's minds. An example of a distinctive brand asset would be the Gatorade Bolt. Everybody knows what that bolt means. It has all these positive associations about achievement and pushing yourself and getting to the next
Hmm.
level and fuel and professional athletes and basketball teams and sportsmanship. It has just all these positive associations that people hold in their minds. That's why it's one of the most powerful brands in the beverage and hydration category. So we want to build these assets not just to be a design element. A lot
Hmm.
of companies will go and create a pretty design or a logo that looks good. That's not what matters. What matters is having some kind of icon or branding that actually
Hmm.
communicates what it is you're selling and has meaning. And that's how I think about it, that I need to build an array of assets that enables that goes into memory structure, and that helps build those roots and those branches so that the brand grows and grows in the mind.
Would I be on point if I were to say that people really need to think about unpacking the stories that relate to the overall cause or the mission of your brand and build that out to create those positive associations?
Yes, but the stories still have to be made up of assets. And when I'm talking about assets, I'm talking about the world of
Hmm.
symbols, the world of visual codes and
Right.
cues. And that is a really important distinction because I see a lot of fuss about storytelling, and companies are spending a lot of money on
Hmm.
storytelling, but those stories aren't sticky. So they're going in again, they're going in one ear and out the other. And what I'm trying to reinforce here is the notion of codifying your
Hmm.
expertise, codifying your benefit, codifying the feeling that a consumer will get in terms of the experience of using you. We have to create codes and cues because those are the things that people
Hmm.
remember. And these other more wispy things like stories or emotion, they just don't stick.
Okay.
So they're very particular codified codes and cues. A perfect example is the snow-capped mountain on the Aquafina bottled water. That snow-capped mountain means all these positive things: pure, pristine, eco-friendly, water
Hmm.
from the glaciers, the best water there is. It has all these positive associations all packed into this tiny little snow-capped
Hmm.
mountain that you see on that bottle. And it's amazing. The brain doesn't have to work hard to understand that. Our brains are really, and when you see that snow-capped mountain, your brain is already telling you, oh, snow-capped mountain, that's a match. I know what
Hmm.
that is. So there's a match between my brain and the brand. They literally come together at that moment. And not only is there a match of recognition, but there's meaning in my brain already about what snow-capped mountain
Hmm.
means: pure, pristine, eco-friendly, water from the glaciers, the best water there is. So I don't need to spend a lot of money communicating all those associations because they're already in my own
Right.
mind. And that's what I mean by a growth trigger. And there's a whole chapter on growth triggers in my book that can help companies figure out how they can find their own growth
Hmm.
triggers. But this is a combination of science and art and understanding that humans communicate in to one another in cognitive shortcuts. At least that's the most
Hmm.
effective way to communicate. A long story I'm going to
Certainly.
forget, but a cognitive shortcut I'm going to remember.
I know there's a chapter in the book, but could you orient us, if you will, in terms of thinking how we should be thinking about coming up with such an asset like the snow-capped mountain?
So you would really need to do an exploration of visual
Hmm.
cues. And what you would find by doing that exploration with consumers is that there would be these universally resonant, to use your language, universally resonant codes and cues that everybody understands.
Hmm.
And it's going to be so powerful. It's going to be a universal trigger, and it won't care whether you're young, old, female, male, transgender. It won't care. It won't care. There will be universal triggers that are convergent for
Hmm.
everybody because our brains are much more similar than they are different. Much of the world of marketing is still trying to segment audiences down to the individual. And that's useful for
Hmm.
finding people, but it's not useful for communications. I believe, and what I've seen over 30 years of work, is that humans are much more similar than they are different. And we're asking the wrong question when we try to segment messages into slice and dice
Hmm.
audiences into a million different pieces for the purpose of messaging. Because we shouldn't be asking ourselves, why are people
Hmm.
different? We should be asking ourselves, why are humans the same? Because I want my brand to be
Hmm.
convergent. I want it to mean the same thing across people. That's what makes a strong brand. And if a brand starts meaning different things to different people, it's going to stop
Hmm.
being a brand.
I'm also curious. There's obviously an element of education with brands, and in particular, I would say B2B brands, at least from my experience, because the products or services are complex, and in order to best maximize it, given the number of users and other stakeholders involved, there is an element of education. How do we incorporate what you're talking about into the content that we create?
So it really comes down to communicating using these cognitive shortcuts.
Hmm.
I'm suggesting that you can supercharge your content with the codes and cues that tell your
Hmm.
story. But instead of just giving people a narrative that's going to be forgotten tomorrow, can you remember the last story that somebody told you in any
Hmm.
detail? No, but you do remember codes and cues. So I would suggest that you load your content up, even if it's something that's a really complex product or technology. The best thing you could do is simplify it down to some really easy to understand symbols, visual codes and cues that get your message across. And those things, again, are going to be a code, a visual code or cue for your
Hmm.
expertise, a visual code or cue that communicates that you're an advanced technology, a visual code or cue that communicates your brand identification, your brand identity, your benefit, the benefit that you provide. The more you can codify, and just, you don't need a many, it's just a handful, 3 to 5 really powerful cues, and you're off to the races.
In terms of things like podcast interviews or webinars and things of that nature that a lot of CEOs and other C-suite of companies seem to be investing in, it's certainly one thing to share your story and some of these assets. How would you recommend they use it to drive engagement? Because if you're going after resonance, then I would think that engagement is perhaps one of the key metrics that you'd be
Sure.
looking at. Do we need to alter our thinking to ensure that we are not just achieving resonance, but fostering engagement as well?
I think it starts from the same place, which is we need to create a match between what's in your mind and what the brand is
Hmm.
projecting. And when we do that, we create engagement. We create instinctive brand preference, and then
Hmm.
the person engages with you all the time. But you really do need to understand your audience and your target at a level of depth that most companies still are not doing today, because they're still looking at surface attributes, typical surveys, which are all conscious based. And that means they're telling you the first thing that comes to mind, which may not be the most important thing that actually drives them. And then, by the way, I don't think that customers or consumers knows know what drives them
Yep.
anyway. So they can actually be misleading. I'll give you a perfect example. We always hear, do not compare yourself from
Mm-hmm.
consumers. Don't compare yourself to the competitive brand. Don't mention them. Don't compare yourself. And we never actually recommend that a company outright says the
Mm-hmm.
name of the other brand because it could end up inadvertently promoting the other brand. But we do recommend comparisons because contrast is one of the most
Mm-hmm.
powerful things to the human brain. But consumers will tell you don't do that either. And I will tell you every time we test that out in the
Mm-hmm.
marketplace, it
Mm.
wins and sales go up. So we also need to understand what not to listen to consumers about. When consumers say, I like this or I like that, you have to
Mm-hmm.
ignore it because liking something, appeal, is actually not a predictor of sales. It's not a predictor of instinctive brand preference or of choice. People like a lot of things. You like things
Mm.
all day on Facebook, right? But you don't necessarily buy them. So the measure that we want to look at is really instinctive brand preference and that the positive associations are going up. That's how we should be evaluating
Now,
things.
when we say the positive association should be going up, how do we do that effectively in order to get a leading indicator as opposed to a lagging indicator?
So it's a very simple metric that you add, so that you ask. So now you're not going to be evaluating, let's say you were doing concept
Mm-hmm.
work, you wouldn't be evaluating the concepts based on likes and dislikes or appeal. You would be evaluating the concepts based on, is it elevating the
Mm-hmm.
brand in people's minds to create perceived superiority? I actually don't care about actual
Mm.
superiority. All that matters is perceived superiority. And is it creating new positive associations about the brand that I didn't have before that take down barriers?
And are you unpacking this through just noting behaviors, or do you actually sit down at interviews? Oh,
Through research.
okay.
That's done through
Certainly.
research, but it's a research that's really focused on what's more
Mhm.
latent than what is more manifest, more external.
And if I'm hearing you correctly, you're suggesting that we actually engage on this on an ongoing basis. Would that be correct? Right.
100%. You should be tracking your
Mhm.
brand at the implicit level, not at the conscious level, because the conscious level may be
Mhm.
misleading and it's not necessarily correlated to business
Certainly.
performance. We happen to have a brand health tracking system that tracks brands over
Sure.
time
Okay.
on an implicit level. But that's what companies really need to
Mhm.
get to make sure that they're just not taken by surprise. In a sense, it's much more predictive model, whereas a conscious metric is really backward looking. It's not picking up what's brewing, what's coming
Mhm.
down the road. So it's not ferreting out that the growth target actually has some negative associations that are going to hurt your business 6 months from now.
Certainly. Two questions. One, are you suggesting that we could perhaps do away with traditional funnel type models, including the ADAPS perspective that we've long since been taught, and hone in on the brand connectome and help people move forward based on the associations that we create for them? Yeah, yeah. I'll break it up. So that's my first question.
I am basically saying that the world of
Mhm.
marketing is still operating on a model that was launched 60 years ago by the big ad
Yeah.
agencies as well as big marketing firms. And we crafted a whole set of principles for the
Mhm.
conscious mind because we thought the conscious mind was making the decisions. But hang on, now we know now in the mid 2000s, neuroscience, behavioral science, all of this has come out. And that's what I basically studied in the last
Mhm.
30 years. We now know that the brain is mostly making decisions instinctively. And I would say we need a new way to approach marketing. And that's actually what's in
Mhm.
my book because the new rules of persuasion in business and life are the new rules for the instinctive mind, which basically throws out some of the old rules that are holding us back. I'll give you a perfect example. Most people in marketing still think that uniqueness is paramount. That's the number one thing that's going to drive your business. But wait a minute, the human brain is hardwired to connect with the
Mhm.
familiar. We reject the unique. You take a baby out of its mother's arms and it's going to scream because you put the baby with that familiar face of its mother in somebody else's, a stranger's arms. Or think about the pandemic. During the pandemic, we didn't reach for the brands that were no name brands we never heard of. Those were the ones that were left on the
Mm.
shelves. The brands we went for first and that were sold out in a day were all the big, large legacy brands that we know and love, because that made us feel instinctively comfortable and secure when our survival was at stake. So that is a really good example. My new rule in the book is distinctiveness is the most
Mhm.
powerful thing, which is different than uniqueness. Uniqueness is being completely
Yeah.
foreign. Distinctiveness rides existing familiar pathways, but it now enables you to make them distinctive to your brand. So it's like a creative twist on the familiar.
Mhm.
And I tell my clients, let's throw out the word uniqueness because distinctiveness is what it's all about.
Good points there. I'm sure we just touched the tip of the iceberg, but yeah, is there perhaps an aspect to this idea of the instinctive mind that you find doesn't get much airtime? If so, what would it be?
There's 10 rules in my book that are all watch outs because if you follow the old rules of marketing, you will go down the
Mhm.
wrong path. And so I would say read the book just because it's really gonna
Mhm.
empower you, not just to understand marketing for the sake of building a brand or a business. It will help you understand everything. It helps you understand how politics works, why a particular candidate won the
Mhm.
last election. You'll really be able to have a new lens on what drives success in the marketplace of ideas, and you'll be empowered to change it
Mhm.
much faster than you would if you take the old slow.
And your book is available at all major retailers, I would assume, including Amazon. But if listeners are
Yeah.
curious, want to find out more or connect with you, where would you recommend they head to?
Yeah, they can connect with me on LinkedIn. I always love to make new friends. And yeah, Amazon is probably the quickest place.
Mhm.
Barnes and Noble is another quick way you can get my book. I'd love to hear what you think. There are a lot of reviews on Amazon you can read to learn a little bit more about why people are buying
Mhm.
this. A bunch of companies have been buying the book, a couple hundred books to give to their employees because it's a really useful guidebook, so to speak, for
Mhm.
how to practically change your business and grow business faster. Just to sum up, I would say we need to stop trying to persuade people because that's not going to work
Mhm.
very well. It's exhausting and it's a waste of time.
Yeah.
You're going to come up against that conscious mind that's resistant. And instinct is the most powerful force for driving human behavior. And knowing these rules is really going to enable you to make change in your life and in your business much
Mhm.
faster.
We'll include links to that in the show notes. Leslie, thank you. This has been eye-opening, I would hope, for most of us, including myself. So thank you for doing this.
Oh, my pleasure. It was so lovely chatting with you.